Help me. Please, someone help me. The frantic voice crackled through the 911 operator's headset, a desperate plea cutting through the otherwise quiet morning. He's not breathing. My husband. I think he's had a heart attack. The operator, seasoned enough to remain calm amidst the chaos, efficiently gathered the necessary information. Name, address, medical history. The crucial details painted a picture of a life hanging precariously in the balance. The address registered in the system: 12 Oakwood Drive, Serenity Pines. Serenity Pines. The name itself was a carefully crafted illusion. Tucked away on the outskirts of town, it was an exclusive enclave of sprawling estates and meticulously manicured lawns, a world seemingly untouched by the everyday struggles of ordinary life. A world Sarah knew very well was often insulated from reality, but never immune. The call was immediately dispatched. Sarah Ramirez, already halfway through her lukewarm coffee, jolted at the shrill blare of the dispatch alert. Beside her, Mark, her partner, sighed dramatically, his usual morning grumble replaced by a more focused alertness. He raised an eyebrow at Sarah, who was already pulling on her jacket. "Sounds urgent," she stated, her voice tight. The urgency in Mrs. Henderson's voice still echoed in her mind. "Possible cardiac arrest, Serenity Pines." Mark whistled. "Serenity Pines, huh? Probably just indigestion from too much caviar." He didn't really believe that, and Sarah knew it. He was just trying to lighten the mood, a nervous habit he had. Sarah didn't smile. "Let's go. Every second counts." The ambulance roared to life, siren muted as they navigated the initial residential streets. As they approached the entrance to Serenity Pines, the landscape dramatically shifted. Cookie-cutter houses gave way to imposing gates guarded by a security booth. The manicured lawns stretched endlessly, punctuated by perfectly symmetrical trees and carefully placed flower beds, an absurd contrast to the chaos they were about to encounter. Dale, the HOA guard on duty, was expecting them. Or rather, he was expecting someone. He'd been alerted to an incoming ambulance and had his instructions: verify residency, get a name, and, if possible, ascertain the nature of the emergency. He puffed out his chest as the ambulance screeched to a halt before the gate. Sarah rolled down her window, already impatient. "We have a cardiac arrest at 12 Oakwood Drive. Open the gate." Dale, however, wasn't easily swayed by urgency. He peered at Sarah with suspicion, his eyes narrowed behind his mirrored sunglasses. "Name and badge number, ma'am, and proof of residency." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Are you serious? Someone's life is on the line. We don't have time for this." "Protocol is protocol," Dale retorted, his voice flat. He pointed to a small sign posted on the side of the booth that read, "All visitors must register." Mark leaned forward from the passenger seat. "Buddy, we're paramedics. We're here to save someone's life. Just open the damn gate." The air crackled with tension. Sarah could feel her pulse quickening, her carefully cultivated calm threatened by the ridiculous delay. She knew that every second wasted arguing with this gatekeeper was a second stolen from Mrs. Henderson's husband. "Look," she said, forcing her voice to remain even. "I understand you have a job to do, but this is a medical emergency. We need to get through. Now." Dale remained unmoved, a stubborn glint in his eye. "I need to see some identification." He reached for his radio. "I'm going to have to call this in to verify." Sarah knew they were losing precious time. She glanced at Mark, a silent question passing between them. She saw the same frustration mirrored in his eyes, the same urgent need to act. "Enough," Sarah said, her voice hardening. She put the ambulance in gear. "We're going through." She hit the gas pedal. The ambulance lurched forward, the tires squealing against the pavement. Dale stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock. Sarah didn't stop. She had a life to save. The gatekeeper. Red and white strobes splashed across the pristine lawns of Serenity Pines, painting the scene with frantic urgency. Sarah braked the ambulance hard, the engine coughing its displeasure. Miguel was already tearing out, jump bag in hand. "Gates locked," he barked, stating the obvious. Sarah bit back a curse. Serenity Pines more like a gilded cage. She despised these enclaves. Every second mattered, and they were designed for delay. A figure emerged from the guardhouse, his gait maddeningly unhurried. Late 50s, perhaps, with a precisely trimmed mustache that seemed to bristle with self-importance. His uniform was impeccable, the badge reflecting the harsh glare of the emergency lights. Dale Harding. Dispatch had flagged him as a stickler for procedure. "Afternoon," Dale drawled, positioning himself squarely before the barrier. "What can I do for you folks?" "Medical emergency," Sarah stated, forcing a level tone. "Dispatch sent us. We need access." Dale's eyes narrowed to slits. "I'll need to see identification." "Are you serious?" Sarah's forced calm shattered. "Someone inside needs help. We haven't got the time." "Regulations are regulations," Dale replied, his voice devoid of inflection. "Can't just let anyone waltz in." A subtle inflation of his chest betrayed a sense of gratification. The flashing lights, the palpable stress, the desperation etched on Sarah's face, it all seemed to invigorate him. Sarah presented her paramedic license. Dale scrutinized it with agonizing slowness, his thumb tracing the edge of the laminate. "And your partner?" Miguel, simmering in silent fury, thrust forward his own credentials. Dale gave it the same meticulous once-over. "All right," Dale conceded, returning the IDs. "Now, I require the address and the patient's name." 14 Oakwood Lane, Eleanor Ainsworth, Sarah recited, her voice strained. "Now, will you please raise the gate?" Dale tapped a pen against his clipboard. "Mrs. Ainsworth is not expecting any visitors today, nor are paramedics on the approved vendor list." Sarah's jaw dropped. "Approved vendor list? Someone's life could be on the line." "I sympathize, ma'am, but I have a duty to uphold community standards. I can contact Mrs. Ainsworth to verify." "Contact her," Miguel roared. "She's unconscious. That's why we're here, man." Dale flinched, though his expression remained stolid. "I'm just adhering to protocol." He stole a nervous glance at the growing queue of cars behind the ambulance, their headlights amplifying the chaos. He loathed the pressure, the sensation of being under scrutiny. Retreating, however, was not an option, not with an audience. "Listen," Sarah said, each word laced with menace. "I'm only saying this once. Open the damn gate, now, or we'll find another way in, and you'll have far more than a petty HOA infraction to answer for." Dale remained unmoved, his jaw clenched tight. "I can't. It's against the rules." A wave of defiance washed over him, an intoxicating sense of dominance derived from his meager authority. He was the guardian at the gate. He wielded control. Sarah didn't hesitate. Shifting the ambulance into drive, she nudged it towards the manicured verge. "Fine," she spat, her voice like chipped ice. "We'll do it your way." Tires shrieked as the ambulance bounced over the curb, heading straight for the meticulously kept lawn. Dale's eyes bulged in disbelief. Lines crossed. "He's crashing, Marcus. We don't have time for this," Sarah yelled, her voice tight with a desperation that clawed at her throat. Dale Harding, arms crossed, remained an unyielding wall of pressed khaki and self-importance. Marcus, her partner, was locked in a futile argument with him about the malfunctioning gate. Sarah scanned the perimeter, her eyes darting from the locked metal bars to the manicured hedges that lined the property. There had to be another way. Henderson's life depended on it. "There's got to be a service entrance or something," she muttered, pushing past Marcus, whose pleas with Dale were growing increasingly frantic. She spotted it, a barely discernible gap in the hedge, partially obscured by overgrown ivy, probably used by the landscaping crew. It was narrow, forcing her to squeeze through, but it was a route, a chance. "I'm going around," she shouted to Marcus, already halfway through the thick foliage, the sharp leaves scratching at her arms. "Sarah, no. He's got every right to stop you," Marcus yelled, finally abandoning his efforts with Dale and turning towards her. But Sarah was already on the other side, jogging across the perfectly trimmed lawn towards the Henderson residence. "Trespasser! Halt!" Dale's voice boomed behind her, amplified by the unnatural stillness of the affluent neighborhood. She ignored him, her focus solely on getting to Henderson. Every second counted. Every labored breath she took was a second Henderson wasn't. Suddenly, a sharp, searing pain erupted in her back, throwing her forward onto the immaculate grass. Her muscles seized, her vision blurred, and a high-pitched whine filled her ears. She was vaguely aware of the taste of dirt in her mouth. The world spun, and her limbs refused to obey her commands. "I warned you." Dale's voice, now closer, was devoid of any emotion. He stood over her, the taser still smoking in his hand. Through the agonizing paralysis, Sarah saw Marcus running towards them, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. "What the hell did you do?" he screamed, his voice cracking with rage. Dale, seemingly unfazed, calmly holstered his taser. "She was trespassing. Protocol is clear." The paralysis began to subside, leaving a throbbing ache in its wake. Sarah tried to push herself up, but her body felt heavy, unresponsive. She spat out a mouthful of grass and dirt, her heart pounding erratically. The precious minutes, the minutes that could have saved Henderson, were slipping away. As Marcus knelt beside her, helping her to sit up, the reality of the situation crashed down on her. She looked towards the Henderson house, the pristine white facade seeming to mock her. She could still hear the faint, desperate sounds of Marcus's pleas with Dale. "The man is dying, you idiot," Marcus shouted, but Dale remained unmoved. Sarah felt a wave of nausea wash over her, a sickening combination of pain, anger, and dread. She looked at Marcus, tears welling in her eyes. "The time. We've lost so much time," she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. The weight of the situation, the knowledge that her actions, however well-intentioned, had only delayed help, pressed down on her with suffocating force. A breath too late. The air in the Hendersons' living room was thick, stagnant. Not with dust, but with something heavier, something like dread. Mr. Henderson sat slumped in his armchair, his normally ruddy face now a ghastly gray. Each breath was a shallow, rattling struggle, a Herculean effort that seemed to drain the last vestiges of color from his skin. His chest heaved, a jerky, uneven bellows. "Henry? Henry? Can you hear me?" Mrs. Henderson's voice was a frayed whisper, barely audible above the rasping wheeze that clawed its way from her husband's throat. She knelt beside him, her hand fluttering nervously over his clammy forehead. Her own breath hitched with each labored gasp of his. Her eyes, wide and brimming with tears, darted between his face and the front door, as if willing someone to burst through it and make everything right. "Please, just breathe, dear," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "Help is coming." He didn't respond, his eyes fixed on some unseen point beyond the ornate grandfather clock ticking ominously in the hallway. A thin sheen of sweat glistened on his upper lip. His fingers, gnarled with age and arthritis, twitched spasmodically in his lap. Then the blessed sound, a siren, faint at first, then growing louder, closer, until it filled the small house, vibrating in Mrs. Henderson's bones. She stumbled to her feet, nearly tripping over the rug, and threw open the front door, waving frantically. Sarah Ramirez practically exploded from the ambulance, her medical bag bouncing against her hip. "Where is he?" she demanded, her voice sharp with urgency. Mrs. Henderson pointed, speechless, her hand shaking so violently she could barely keep it raised. Sarah didn't waste a second. She was across the room in a blur, kneeling beside Mr. Henderson, her fingers immediately finding his pulse weak, thready, almost non-existent. "Oxygen now!" she barked at her partner, who was right behind her. The hiss of the oxygen tank filled the room, a temporary counterpoint to the horrific wheezing. Sarah slapped a mask over Mr. Henderson's face, her movements precise and efficient. "Sir, can you hear me? Squeeze my hand if you can hear me." Nothing. Sarah pulled out her stethoscope, her brow furrowed. The sounds she heard were wet, gurgling, the terrifying symphony of a body shutting down. She glanced at her partner, a silent communication passing between them. This was bad. "We need to intubate," she said, her voice tight. "Get the kit ready." She worked quickly, efficiently, but with a growing sense of dread. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each second a tiny hammer blow against the fragile hope that flickered within her. She knew, deep down, that they were losing him, that precious time had been stolen, wasted on bureaucratic nonsense and petty power plays. Finally, she managed to insert the tube, her hands trembling almost imperceptibly. She listened, her heart sinking. Still the wet, rattling sound. No improvement. "Epinephrine," she ordered, her voice barely a whisper. Her partner administered the shot, his face grim. They waited, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. Then the beeping slowed, became erratic, flatlined. Sarah stared at the monitor, her face a mask of disbelief. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, no, no." She started chest compressions, her movements frantic, desperate. "Come on, breathe, fight." But it was no use. The fight had been lost before she even arrived. The breath had come, but it was a breath too late. Mrs. Henderson stood frozen in the doorway, her face contorted with grief. She understood. She saw it in Sarah's eyes, in the defeated slump of her shoulders. Her world had just crumbled. Aftermath. The ER's buzzing lights cast a sickly pallor over Sarah. Perched on a stiff chair, the flimsy gown offered little comfort. Her skull hammered, a dull echo of the searing jolt from Dale's taser that still radiated in her shoulder. A corrosive guilt gnawed at her insides. Mr. Henderson was gone. Gone because of her stalled arrival, a consequence of Dale Harding's unyielding rigidity. The scene replayed, each element seared into her memory. The imposing gait, Harding's self-satisfied smirk, the awful snap of the taser. Could a different approach have worked? A more convincing argument? A more assertive display of her authority? The what-if swirled, threatening to drown her. Her cell vibrated relentlessly, a chorus of jarring alerts. Headlines blared the disaster. HOA security tasers paramedic, patient dies, gated community gripped by tragedy, security overreach blamed. Social media had erupted, a raging inferno of opinion. A blurred snapshot of her in police custody circulated, drawing a spectrum of commentary, from fervent support, paramedic is a hero, to scathing condemnation, she should have followed protocol. Meanwhile, Dale Harding inhabited the sterile perfection of his living room, the blinds drawn like shields against the afternoon. His phone remained untouched. The HOA president's call had been a clipped demand for an explanation. Dale simply recited the manual's relevant passages, his voice a monotone shield. Procedure had been followed. Duty had been done. Yet, a prickle of disquiet grew within him. Martha, his wife, offered only silence since the news broke. The neighborhood children, once eager to wave at his passing golf cart, now regarded him with accusing eyes. He was an outcast. Live coverage emanated from outside the Henderson residence. A reporter stood amidst a growing collection of flowers, a microphone held aloft. Mrs. Henderson, face ashen and marked by unspeakable loss, was gently guided inside by a neighbor. Dale watched, impassive. Policy. Sarah's gaze was drawn to the same broadcast. The sight of Mrs. Henderson's devastation ignited a renewed wave of fury. This surpassed mere procedure. This was a stolen life, a shattered existence. She raked her hands across her face, the antiseptic hospital air doing little to settle her stomach. Marcus, her partner, arrived, his expression grave. They're already mobilizing, Sarah. The family's lawyer is going after everyone. The HOA, Harding, all of it. Sarah's eyes shut tight. A legal battle couldn't resurrect Mr. Henderson, but perhaps it could deliver a measure of solace. A guarantee such horror wouldn't repeat itself. I'll testify, she rasped. I'll recount everything. The gate, Harding's cold detachment, the irretrievable minutes lost, she would expose it all. Her obligation to Mr. Henderson demanded it. His bereaved wife deserved it. She owed it to herself, too. The battle, clearly, had only just begun. Legal battleground. The sterile white walls of the lawyer's office felt colder than the November air outside. Maria Henderson's knuckles were white as she gripped her husband, David's, hand. Across the polished mahogany table sat Miss Klein, sharp and efficient, a legal shark in a tailored suit. The lawsuit will name Serenity Pines HOA, Dale Harding individually, and Secure Guard Solutions, Miss Klein stated, her voice devoid of emotion. Negligence, wrongful death, infliction of emotional distress. These are the core tenets. We have a strong case. David swallowed hard. Strong enough to bring my son back? His voice cracked. Ms. Klein offered a practiced, sympathetic nod. No, Mr. Henderson, but strong enough to hold those responsible accountable. To ensure this never happens again. Maria squeezed David's hand tighter. Then let's do it. Dale Harding hadn't slept properly in weeks. The stares he received at the grocery store, the whispers that followed him down the street, the silence from his neighbors. It was a constant, gnawing ache. He was ostracized. Even his wife, Carol, kept a wary distance. He ate reheated dinners alone, the television a flickering, unwelcome companion. He clung to the security manual, highlighting passages about protocol and trespassers, finding a strange, desperate solace in the black and white of the regulations. He'd followed procedure. He had. Didn't anyone understand that? When the certified letter arrived, heavy in his trembling hands, he felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. Lawsuit. Henderson versus Harding. The words swam before his eyes. He'd been expecting it, dreading it, but the reality hit him like a physical blow. He was ruined. In the Serenity Pines community clubhouse, the atmosphere was thick with apprehension. The HOA board members, normally a picture of suburban complacency, were agitated. Eleanor Abernathy, the HOA president, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, stood at the head of the long, gleaming table. "This is an outrage," she declared, her voice tight with barely suppressed fury. "A blatant attempt to exploit a tragic situation." Mr. Peterson, the treasurer, a portly man with a nervous tic, wrung his hands. "But a lawsuit, the legal fees alone. We have insurance," Mrs. Abernathy snapped, her eyes glinting. "And we have a responsibility to defend ourselves, defend Dale, and defend the reputation of Serenity Pines. We will not be bullied by emotional appeals." A younger board member, Ms. Chun, tentatively raised her hand. But was Mr. Harding's response proportionate? Mrs. Abernathy fixed her with a withering stare. "Mr. Harding followed protocol. The paramedic was trespassing. We cannot allow unauthorized personnel onto private property. Imagine the chaos if we did. Anyone could wander in claiming an emergency, casing homes for robbery. We must maintain order." She paused, her gaze sweeping the room. "We have retained the services of Harrison and Bellwether. They are experts in HOA law. They will handle this." She tapped the table for emphasis. "We stand our ground." Testimonies. A hushed stillness gripped the courtroom as Sarah Ramirez took the stand. Exhaustion etched deep lines around her eyes that flicked nervously across the room before locking onto the faces of the jury. Her voice, a mere thread at first, cracked as she swore to tell the truth, the whole truth. Her initial account was a stark recital of facts. The desperate call, the urgent mission, the breakneck drive to the gated community. But when she spoke of Dale Harding, of how he'd barred the ambulance's passage, his face a cold mask of authority, the composure fractured. "He wouldn't budge," she rasped, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the witness stand. "I begged him, told him time was running out. He just stood there, a human roadblock, insisted on some HOA regulation." The air in the room seemed to condense, heavy with unspoken judgment. Sarah paused, struggling to regain control. "I tried to circumvent him. I had no choice. Each breath counted. That's when he deployed the taser." Her eyes squeezed shut, the memory and electric shock re-experienced. "I went down, every muscle seized. Air became a luxury I couldn't afford. My only thought was the patient, the fading life depending on us. And I was paralyzed, useless on the asphalt." Her voice dissolved into sobs. "By the time we reached Mr. Henderson, it was too late. I can't help but think, if only we hadn't been delayed." The plaintiff's lawyer approached, offering solace and a tissue. Sarah, visibly battling for composure, blotted her tears. "I'm trapped in a loop, reliving that day, dissecting every second. Could a different approach have worked? Should I have been more assertive? But I always return to the same, damning truth. Dale Harding made a choice. He valued procedure over a man's life." The cross-examination was relentless. The defense attorney, a woman whose gaze could freeze water, assailed Sarah's testimony with laser-like precision. She challenged her decisions, scrutinized her speed, questioned her adherence to protocol. The implication hung heavy in the air. Sarah herself, not Harding, bore responsibility for Mr. Henderson's death. Sarah, initially resolute, visibly withered under the barrage. She exited the stand a shadow of her former self, the day's ordeal etched into her very being. When Dale Harding took his place, he radiated an almost militaristic rigidity. He sat bolt upright, his gaze unwavering on the defense attorney, his voice clipped and devoid of warmth. He recounted the events of that day with an almost clinical detachment, referring to Sarah and her partner as unauthorized individuals, and Mr. Henderson as the resident. "I was merely upholding established protocol," he declared, his jaw muscles visibly clenched. "The Homeowners Association maintains clearly defined policies regarding emergency vehicle access. They were in violation of those policies." The defense attorney guided him through a carefully constructed narrative, portraying him as a dedicated volunteer, a guardian of order and community safety. He spoke of his training, his meticulous understanding of the HOA's convoluted bylaws, his unwavering commitment to the community's well-being. When questioned about the taser incident, his voice remained glacial. I assessed the situation and responded in accordance with my training. I perceived an immediate threat. The paramedics were attempting to circumvent established security measures and gain unauthorized entry to the community. My actions were necessary to maintain order. The plaintiff's lawyer rose slowly, his movements deliberate. Mr. Harding, were you aware that a man was in the process of dying inside that house? I was informed of the reported medical emergency, yes. And yet, you consciously chose to prioritize HOA regulations over the immediate need to save a life? Harding hesitated almost imperceptibly before delivering his response, a statement as frigid as the air in the room. I prioritized the security and well-being of the community. The rules are there for a reason. A wave of murmurs washed over the courtroom. The jury, a cross-section of ordinary citizens, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some glared at Harding with undisguised animosity. Others averted their eyes, their expressions troubled. The gallery erupted in hushed, indignant whispers. Dale Harding remained unmoved, a statue carved from unwavering conviction, surrounded by a sea of grief and disbelief. He offered no apology, no regret, only justification. The weight of his choices now tipped the scales of justice, threatening to shatter the delicate balance. Judgment. Sarah Ramirez sat slumped on the hard wooden bench, the fluorescent lights of the courthouse buzzing a relentless counterpoint to the drumming in her ears. The smell of stale coffee and anxiety hung heavy in the air. Her testimony yesterday felt like a lifetime ago. Each question a fresh cut, each answer dissected and twisted. Dale Harding's cold, unwavering gaze still burned in her memory. He hadn't broken, not once, even when confronted with the undeniable consequences of his actions. Today, the expert witnesses took the stand. First, a consultant on HOA management, a woman with a voice like sharpened steel, meticulously explained the labyrinthine policies of the Shadow Creek HOA. She detailed the security company's training, or rather, the lack thereof, highlighting that de-escalation tactics were barely touched upon, while adherence to protocol was paramount. Sarah felt a flicker of vindication, quickly doused by the heavy weight of Mr. Henderson's absence. Then came the medical testimony. Dr. Albright, a cardiologist with weary eyes and a somber tone, laid out the timeline with clinical precision. Each minute of delay, he explained, exponentially decreased Mr. Henderson's chances of survival. He spoke of irreversible brain damage, of the critical window for intervention, of the difference those precious moments could have made. The courtroom was silent, save for the quiet rustle of papers and the occasional stifled sob from Mr. Henderson's widow. Eleanor Abernathy, ramrod straight, sat beside Dale Harding, her face a mask of controlled composure. Sarah watched her, searching for a flicker of humanity, a hint of remorse. But there was nothing, only a steely determination to protect her domain, her HOA, and the man who had so faithfully enforced its rules. When Dr. Albright's testimony ended, Eleanor leaned towards her lawyer and whispered something, her lips barely moving. The jury filed out to deliberate, leaving an unbearable vacuum in their wake. Time seemed to stretch and compress, each minute an eternity. Sarah closed her eyes, picturing Mr. Henderson, his face pale and strained, reaching for her hand. She imagined what his last moments must have been like. The fear, the confusion, the desperate fight for breath. Hours crawled by. The courtroom emptied, save for the key players, each locked in their own private torment. The tension was palpable, a thick, suffocating blanket. Even Dale Harding seemed to show the slightest crack in his stoicism, his jaw ticking almost imperceptibly. Eleanor Abernathy, however, remained unyielding, her gaze fixed on the empty jury box. Finally, a buzzer sounded, its sharp, insistent tones slicing through the silence. The bailiff announced, "The jury has reached a verdict." A collective intake of breath filled the room. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She gripped the bench so hard her knuckles turned white. The jury filed back in, their faces unreadable. The foreman, a young woman with tired eyes, handed the verdict form to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Judge Thompson scanned the document, his expression grave. He cleared his throat. In the matter of Henderson versus Shadow Creek Homeowners Association and Dale Harding, we the jury find. He paused, the silence deafening. The defendants, Shadow Creek Homeowners Association and Dale Harding, liable. Beyond the gate, Sarah Ramirez paced the worn linoleum of the courthouse hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead mirroring the frantic energy thrumming beneath her skin. The verdict. It hung in the air, thick and suffocating, a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She clutched her phone, willing it to ring, willing the endless waiting to be over. The scent of stale coffee and anxiety permeated the space, clinging to the fabric of her clothes. She pictured Mr. Henderson's face, the kindness etched in the lines around his eyes. How different would things be if the rigid rules hadn't been prioritized over a human life? Her stomach twisted. Finally, her phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Henderson's lawyer. One word, guilty. Relief, sharp and unexpected, sliced through the anxiety. But it was quickly followed by a hollow ache. Guilty wouldn't bring Mr. Henderson back. It wouldn't erase the image of the paramedic, face contorted in pain, lying on the manicured lawn. The news spread quickly. Sarah saw it flicker across her phone, local news sites flashing the headline. She felt a surge of determination. This couldn't be the end. The following weeks were a blur of meetings, petitions, and late-night phone calls. Sarah, fueled by grief and a fierce sense of justice, threw herself into advocating for changes to the HOA's policies. She argued for revised emergency response protocols, for mandatory sensitivity training for security personnel, for a system that prioritized human well-being over property lines and petty rules. Her voice, once hesitant, now resonated with unwavering conviction. She presented her case to the board, the same board that had remained stubbornly silent after the tragedy. She saw discomfort flicker in their eyes as she recounted the events, the preventable death, the callous disregard for human life. She hammered home the point. This wasn't about blame, it was about ensuring it never happened again. She spoke not only for the Hendersons, but for every resident who deserved to feel safe and protected in their community. Meanwhile, Mrs. Henderson, though still reeling from her loss, found a measure of peace by establishing a foundation in her husband's name. It would focus on providing resources and training for first responders, ensuring they were equipped to handle emergencies effectively, regardless of the obstacles placed in their path. His legacy, she vowed, would be one of compassion and service. Across town, in his sterile apartment, Dale Harding stared at the television screen. The verdict splashed across the news. The stoic facade he'd maintained throughout the trial began to crack. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, the gesture revealing a tremor he couldn't control. He hadn't meant for any of this to happen. He'd just been following the rules, doing his job. But the weight of his actions, the irreversible consequences, pressed down on him, a suffocating burden he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. He saw Mr. Henderson's face in his mind's eye, a fleeting image of the man he had unwittingly helped to kill. Sarah's relentless advocacy eventually yielded results. The HOA board, facing mounting pressure and public scrutiny, finally relented. They agreed to revise their policies, to implement the changes Sarah had proposed. It was a small victory, hard-won and bittersweet, but a victory nonetheless. Standing by Mr. Henderson's newly planted memorial tree, Sarah watched as a paramedic knelt to place a single white rose at its base. The air was still, the setting sun casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. She knew the scars of the tragedy would remain, a constant reminder of the devastating consequences of prioritizing rigid rules over empathy and human life. But in the quiet rustle of the leaves, she heard a whisper of hope, a promise that things could, and would, be different. The gate, once a symbol of exclusion and control, now stood slightly ajar, a crack of light illuminating a path toward a more compassionate future.